The Devereux Gallery was a shining beacon of high art in the city, a place where only the most established and well-connected artists were given the honor of having their works displayed. The gallery's sleek modern design and pristine white walls were a testament to its exclusivity, and the patrons who visited rarely did so without a significant checkbook. Elijah Mercer, dressed in a simple but well-fitted suit, approached the gallery with a mixture of nerves and determination. He had spent years honing his craft, painting vivid, powerful pieces that blended surrealism with his deep-rooted cultural experiences. But the art world had been cold and unwelcoming to him, often dismissing his work without even a glance. He had no connections, no insider status, and he certainly didn't have the luxury of a well-known name. But Elijah was determined. This gallery was his shot. If he could present his work to Harold Devereux, the gallery's owner, perhaps he could finally find the validation he had long been seeking. With a steadying breath, Elijah pushed open the door. The cool air inside was quiet, almost sterile, with patrons drifting from one artwork to the next, exchanging murmurs about the pieces before them. Harold was standing behind the counter, engaged in conversation with a group of collectors, his back turned as Elijah walked in. Elijah waited for the group to disperse before making his way up to the counter. He'd done his research on Harold Devereux. The man was known for his discerning eye and exclusive taste, but Elijah felt confident in his work, knowing it had a unique voice to offer. "Excuse me, Mr. Devereux," Elijah said, his voice steady but respectful. Harold turned slowly, assessing Elijah with a calculating gaze. His eyes flickered down briefly, taking in Elijah's simple suit, his worn leather portfolio, and the quiet determination in his face. Without a word, Harold's expression shifted, something between indifference and amusement. "Can I help you?" Harold asked, his tone more dismissive than welcoming. "I'm Elijah Mercer," Elijah replied, offering his hand with a polite but firm gesture. "I'm an artist, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of showcasing my work here. I believe my art could resonate with your audience." Harold glanced at Elijah's hand for a brief moment before shaking it, his grip limp. "And what kind of work do you do?" Harold asked, his voice carrying a hint of thinly veiled condescension. Elijah felt the sting of judgment but held his ground. "I focus on themes of resilience and identity, blending surrealism with cultural storytelling. My work captures strength and struggle, juxtaposing personal experience with universal narratives." Harold raised an eyebrow but didn't look at Elijah's portfolio. Instead, he made a show of folding his arms across his chest, scanning Elijah with a quick, disinterested glance. Interesting. I'm sure it's quite expressive," Harold said, a barely concealed smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "But I don't think this gallery is the right venue for your work." Elijah's stomach sank, but he pressed on. "I believe my work has depth, Mr. Devereux. I'd appreciate the chance to show you." He opened his portfolio and pulled out one of his pieces, titled Roots of Resilience. It depicted a figure standing strong amidst a violent storm, their feet planted firmly in the earth, untouched by the chaos swirling around them. The colors were bold, and the emotional intensity of the piece seemed to fill the air around it. Harold barely looked at it before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "I'm sure it's very emotional, but this kind of work," he paused for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "It's more suited for community centers or local coffee shops. Not a gallery like mine." The words stung, and Elijah could feel his cheeks burn, but he swallowed his pride. "I'd appreciate it if you would just take a moment to really look," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. Harold shook his head, clearly uninterested. "I've seen what I need to see, Mr. Mercer. I suggest you try something smaller. Maybe some of the smaller venues around town might be interested in your style. But this space," he motioned toward the sleek, minimalist walls and the high-end art pieces hanging on them. "This space is for artists with a bit more polish." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. His work had taken years of sacrifice, struggle, and persistence, and this was the reception he received? But he held his composure, keeping his voice steady despite the wave of humiliation crashing over him. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Devereux," Elijah said quietly, gathering his portfolio. "I'll be on my way." As Elijah turned to leave, Harold called after him, a final jab that cut deeper than anything before. "Best of luck, Mr. Mercer. It's a tough world for artists like you." Elijah's chest tightened, but he didn't stop to respond. He walked out of the gallery, his head held high despite the sting of rejection. The city's bright lights blurred in front of him as he made his way down the street, fighting back the anger and frustration that threatened to surface. But as he walked, something else began to take root: determination. "I'll show him," Elijah thought. "I'll show them all." The road ahead would be long and filled with more rejection, but Elijah knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let this moment define him. He was going to prove his worth, not just to Harold Devereux, but to the entire art world. And he wouldn't need anyone's permission to do it. Elijah Mercer's path to becoming a successful artist was not one marked by privilege or easy access. Born and raised in a small, tight-knit neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, Elijah's early life was shaped by the reality of limited opportunities. His family, working class and deeply rooted in the community, prioritized survival over luxury. Art, while celebrated in his home as a form of expression, was not viewed as a practical career. From an early age, Elijah was encouraged to get a real job, but his passion for art remained steadfast. Every moment he could, he would escape into his sketchbooks, filling the pages with drawings that spoke of his world, his neighborhood, his people, and the struggles they faced. It was through these early works that Elijah found his voice, exploring themes of identity, resilience, and community in a way that felt deeply personal yet universally relatable. Humble beginnings. While his family supported his passion, they couldn't afford to provide the kind of artistic education Elijah yearned for. Basic supplies were a luxury, and the art schools he dreamed of attending were far beyond his financial reach. Undeterred, Elijah taught himself by poring over library books, watching public television art programs, and practicing relentlessly. His bedroom became his studio, cluttered with unfinished pieces, books on surrealism, and self-taught techniques. Despite the love he received at home, the world outside was far less kind. At school, teachers praised his talent but often reminded him that his dreams of becoming a full-time artist were impractical. "You need something stable, Elijah," they would say. "Art is a tough world. You need to be realistic." But the more they told him no, the more Elijah's resolve grew. He wasn't willing to give up on his dreams, no matter how unattainable they seemed to others. When Elijah graduated high school, he set out to make his mark on the art world. With no formal training, he began applying to galleries, art exhibitions, and competitions, hoping that one of his pieces would catch the eye of someone who could open the door to a professional career. But the responses were disheartening, rejection after rejection. The art world, as he quickly learned, was not welcoming to outsiders. "Too experimental," said one gallery owner. "Not what we're looking for," said another. "Try a community center or local coffee shop. Maybe they'll appreciate this more," a curator suggested dismissively. Elijah could feel the sting of every rejection, but he pressed on, determined to make a place for his art in the world, even if the world didn't seem ready for it. Facing systemic barriers. As Elijah continued to face systemic barriers in the traditional art world, his confidence wavered. The galleries he had hoped would embrace his work were often gatekept by industry standards that valued established names and connections over fresh, untapped talent. For a young black artist from a working-class background, it felt like the deck was stacked against him. But Elijah refused to let these obstacles define him. The more rejection he encountered, the more determined he became to find his own path. The systemic racism and bias that he faced in the traditional art world became the fuel for his passion, pushing him to use his art as a tool for empowerment, for raising awareness about issues of identity and social justice. Elijah's work wasn't just about creating art, it was about creating change, about having his voice heard despite the silence surrounding it. The breakthrough moment. With gallery doors closing in his face, Elijah turned to the only platform that seemed to offer a level playing field: social media. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook were still emerging as spaces for creative expression, and they presented an opportunity Elijah couldn't ignore. He began by sharing his work online, posting photographs of his paintings, sketches, and the stories behind each piece. Initially, his posts received little attention, just a handful of likes and comments from family and friends. But he remained persistent, posting regularly and honing his personal narrative. He connected with other artists, joined online art communities, and began to gain a small but dedicated following. Elijah's work resonated with people, particularly those who saw their own struggles reflected in his pieces. One day, an influential art blogger discovered Elijah's page and shared one of his paintings with their followers. The post went viral, and suddenly Elijah found himself at the center of an online art movement. His work, deeply personal yet universally powerful, was now being seen by thousands, then tens of thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands of people around the world. It wasn't long before collectors began reaching out. They were drawn to the raw emotion in Elijah's paintings, the stories embedded in each brushstroke. They saw potential, real value, in his work. The first big sale. Among the messages Elijah received was one from Martin Greaves, a well-known art collector with an eye for emerging talent. Martin was impressed by Elijah's ability to blend surrealism with powerful social commentary, and he wanted to purchase one of his paintings for his private collection. Elijah's heart raced when Martin offered to buy his piece rooted in resilience for $20,000, a sum Elijah had never imagined earning for a single work. This sale marked a turning point, confirming what Elijah had known all along: his work had value, and the world was finally starting to recognize it. With Martin's support, Elijah's reputation grew. His works began selling in online auctions, his follower count skyrocketed, and his pieces were exhibited in virtual galleries. The more his name spread, the more prominent collectors sought him out. But even as his success grew, Elijah remained grounded. The art world might have rejected him at first, but now he had the power to shape it on his own terms. Breaking records. Elijah's breakthrough came when one of his pieces, The Dreamer's Ascent, was selected for a high-profile auction in New York City. The surreal painting, which depicted a young boy standing on a mountain of intertwined hands reaching for a crescent moon, resonated deeply with the art world's elite. The bidding started at $50,000, but the room quickly exploded into a frenzy as collectors competed to own the piece. Elijah stood quietly in the back of the room, watching as his work was valued at over $2 million, more than he could have ever dreamed. It wasn't just the sale that mattered to Elijah, it was the message that this sale sent. His art, born from the struggle and the beauty of his community, had found its place in the world. And it wasn't just an art world. It was the world's art world. Elijah had arrived. A new mission. With newfound success came an even greater sense of responsibility. Elijah knew that his platform could be used for more than just personal gain, it could be used to uplift others. He began using his growing influence to showcase the works of other underrepresented artists, ensuring they too had the opportunity to be seen and heard. He also launched the Horizon Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing mentorship and resources for emerging artists from underserved communities. The foundation's mission was simple: to create an equitable art world, one where talent, not background, was the only thing that mattered. As Elijah looked at his work, now hanging in some of the most prestigious galleries and private collections in the world, he couldn't help but think of the journey that had brought him here. He had overcome rejection, doubt, and the biases of an art world that didn't want to make space for someone like him. But Elijah had made space for himself, and for so many others like him. The journey was far from over, but Elijah knew one thing: he was finally where he was meant to be. The Devereux Gallery had seen better days. For years, Harold Devereux had prided himself on curating the finest selection of established artists, offering high-end pieces to the wealthiest collectors in the art world. But as taste shifted and new voices emerged, the gallery's once vibrant clientele had dwindled. The high-profile auctions that had once filled the space with excitement now felt like distant memories, and the pressure to reclaim the gallery's prestige was mounting. Desperate to turn things around, Harold had pulled all the stops for the upcoming Art Horizon auction, an exclusive event that promised to feature the best of what the art world had to offer. Invitations had been sent to elite collectors, curators, and investors, and the gallery had even secured a few prominent names to headline the event. But Harold, ever the perfectionist, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it might not be enough. The night before the auction, he stood in the gallery, inspecting each piece that would be displayed. His mind raced as he mentally calculated the financial gaps he had to bridge. The auction needed to succeed, or the gallery would face serious repercussions. He needed this to work, his reputation, and his livelihood, depended on it. Elijah's unseen influence. Across town, Elijah Mercer sat in his modest studio, working late into the night on a new piece. His career had skyrocketed since his breakthrough, and the world had begun to take notice. From the moment his works had started selling for millions, he'd become a symbol of success in the art world. Elijah's name was on everyone's lips, and his rise had been nothing short of meteoric. Then came the invitation from Harold's gallery to the Art Horizon auction, an exclusive event where Elijah's work would be showcased alongside a select few high-profile artists. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just a few months ago, he had walked into that very gallery, portfolio in hand, hoping for a chance to show his work. But Harold had dismissed him as an unknown, offering condescending words about his amateur art. Now, not only was Elijah invited as a VIP guest, but his pieces were also the centerpiece of the auction. Elijah smiled quietly as he read the invitation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to prove his worth, not just to Harold, but to the entire art world. The best revenge, after all, was success. The night of the auction. The evening of the Art Horizon auction arrived with all the glamour and luxury one would expect from a high-profile event. The Grand Meridian Hotel had been transformed into an opulent venue, with the ballroom decked out in crystal chandeliers and rich velvet drapes. Servers in tuxedos moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the rich aroma of hors d'oeuvres filled the air. Harold moved through the space, greeting guests and trying to calm the rising anxiety that gnawed at him. He had pulled off a stellar guest list, but he still felt a sense of uncertainty about the evening. He'd put everything into this event. If it didn't succeed, the gallery might not survive. Elijah entered the ballroom quietly, wearing a sleek black suit that seemed to command attention even without him trying. His calm confidence contrasted with the lavish surroundings, and he drew curious looks from the crowd. He wasn't just an artist anymore. Elijah was a force, a transformative figure in the art world, and tonight, he was determined to make his mark. Harold, busy mingling with patrons, hadn't noticed Elijah's arrival. He was caught up in his own nervous energy, shaking hands with curators and investors. But when the auctioneer's voice filled the room, introducing the night's lineup, Harold's mind refocused on the task at hand. The unveiling of Elijah's work. The first few lots had sold well, with bidding wars erupting over pieces by prominent artists. The atmosphere in the room was charged with excitement. But when the auctioneer announced the next piece, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. Our next collection, the auctioneer began, features the work of a truly visionary artist. Please join me in welcoming the remarkable Elijah Mercer, whose pieces tonight promise to set new records. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Elijah stood at the back, watching as his works were revealed on the screen. The first piece, The Dreamer's Path, was a breathtaking piece that blended surrealism with poignant cultural storytelling. The figure of a person walking a glowing path amidst a celestial backdrop was mesmerizing. Elijah Mercer's The Dreamer's Path, starting bid, $3 million, the auctioneer announced. The room erupted into a flurry of bids. Harold's heart raced as the number soared. He couldn't help but watch in stunned silence as the price climbed, higher and higher. $5 million. $6 million. The final hammer came down at an astonishing $8.7 million, and the room cheered. Elijah smiled softly, nodding his thanks as the buyer, a well-known international collector, shook his hand. The next few pieces in Elijah's collection followed suit, each one breaking records. Roots of Eternity went for $10 million, and Eclipsed Horizons topped $12 million. As each piece sold for more than anyone had anticipated, the excitement in the room reached a fever pitch. Harold watched, his face a mix of awe and disbelief. Elijah's work wasn't just a highlight, it was the highlight of the night. The revelation. As the final pieces of the auction were sold, the auctioneer turned to the crowd, ready to make the closing announcement. Before we finish tonight, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a truly special individual who has not only shared their incredible work with us, but has also been instrumental in the success of this evening. The room went silent in anticipation. Harold shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was coming. Elijah Mercer, the auctioneer continued, is not only an artist tonight, but also one of the major buyers at this auction. Mr. Mercer represents a powerful collective of art investors committed to supporting emerging and diverse voices in the art world. The room gasped. Harold's jaw dropped as he realized that not only had Elijah's work been the center of attention, but the artist himself was a key player in the evening's success. Elijah had become a buyer, not just a seller, representing a collective of investors whose presence in the room was reshaping the art world. Harold stood frozen, his mind racing as the applause thundered around him. The man he had dismissed months ago as an amateur was now at the forefront of an entirely new wave of art and investment. Elijah stood, acknowledging the applause with a quiet nod. His presence wasn't just as an artist, it was as a transformative force in the art world. A humbling moment for Harold. As the event drew to a close, Harold couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. He had invited Elijah to the auction, unaware of the artist's growing influence. Now, not only was Elijah the star of the evening, but his role as a major buyer had completely changed the dynamic of the event. Harold, humbled, approached Elijah after the crowd had dispersed. I don't know what to say, Elijah. You've completely transformed this evening. I never imagined. I never realized. Elijah turned to face him, a hint of a smile on his lips. I think it's safe to say that you've learned something tonight, Harold. Art isn't just about names, it's about vision. And the future belongs to those who are willing to look beyond the surface. Harold nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of his earlier dismissal. I was wrong about you, Elijah. I'm sorry. Elijah's smile softened. It's not about apologies. It's about progress. And I think we've just taken a big step forward. As Elijah walked away, Harold stood in the shadow of his own mistakes, realizing that the world of art was changing, and he was either going to adapt or be left behind. Elijah had not just proved his worth, he had proven that the future of art belonged to those who believed in its power to break barriers. The Art Horizon auction was in full swing, and the energy in the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom was electric. Collectors from across the world murmured excitedly to each other as they placed bids, eager to secure the best pieces from what was promised to be one of the most exclusive and lucrative auctions of the year. Harold Devereux moved swiftly through the crowd, greeting guests with a practiced smile and keeping an eye on the proceedings. The night was a critical one for his gallery, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The auction had already seen some impressive sales, with several pieces from established artists fetching significant bids. But Harold had been hoping for a few big-ticket items, works that would not only sell for astronomical prices but would solidify the gallery's position as a leader in the contemporary art scene. The crowd grew hushed as the next item was announced. Our next featured artist, the auctioneer said, raising a hand to command the room's attention, is none other than Elijah Mercer, whose pieces have taken the art world by storm. Known for his unique blend of surrealism and cultural commentary, his work has captured the imagination of collectors worldwide. Harold's heart skipped a beat. He had known Elijah's pieces were part of the auction, but he hadn't expected them to be the centerpieces of the event. His mind immediately raced to the day he had dismissed Elijah at the gallery, the memory of his earlier condescension fresh in his mind. The screen behind the auctioneer illuminated with an image of the Dreamer's Path, one of Elijah's most stunning paintings. It depicted a lone figure walking a glowing, otherworldly path, surrounded by a swirling cosmic sky. The colors were vibrant, the composition breathtaking. Harold felt a sinking sensation as the crowd murmured their approval. "Starting bid, $3 million, the auctioneer called out. Harold's stomach twisted. The price was already higher than some of the earlier bids, and the energy in the room had shifted. Bidders raised their paddles almost immediately, with numbers climbing faster than Harold could track. The auctioneer's voice rang out with increasing speed as the bids soared, finally closing at an astounding $8.5 million. The crowd erupted into applause, and Elijah, seated quietly at the front of the room, stood to acknowledge the praise. Harold stood frozen, his mind spinning. $8.5 million for a single piece? He hadn't expected this. Elijah's work was commanding attention on a scale he could never have imagined. And this was only the first of many pieces from Elijah's collection to be auctioned that evening. The bidding frenzy. The next piece, Roots of Resilience, was unveiled, a vivid, powerful painting of a woman standing strong amidst a violent storm, her feet planted firmly in the ground. It was an unflinching exploration of strength in the face of adversity, and the audience responded with equal passion. The auctioneer's voice rang out again. Roots of Resilience by Elijah Mercer, starting bid, $4 million. The bidding began, and Harold watched in astonishment as the number climbed steadily. Each time he thought the bids would slow, the room seemed to surge with more enthusiasm. At one point, two bidders were nearly shouting over each other, with the price rising by hundreds of thousands in mere seconds. When the gavel finally came down, Roots of Resilience had sold for an incredible $10.3 million. The applause was deafening. Harold stood, transfixed by the sheer scale of the success. He had seen artists like this come and go, but never had he witnessed such a rapid, powerful ascent. It wasn't just that Elijah's work was being sold for astronomical amounts, it was the energy in the room. The crowd wasn't just buying art. They were buying into a movement. They were responding to the raw, unfiltered emotion in Elijah's pieces, a story they wanted to be part of. The next few pieces followed suit. Each one shattered expectations, with prices climbing higher and higher. Eclipsed Horizons, another painting by Elijah, sold for $13.5 million, and the auction continued to break records with each passing lot. Harold's amazement turned to awe. He had been part of auctions before, but nothing had ever moved like this. His gallery's collection was certainly impressive, but it was clear now, the true star of the evening wasn't just the art, it was Elijah Mercer. The shocking revelation. As the final pieces were being auctioned off, the auctioneer's voice paused for a moment. The crowd hushed, and anticipation filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's event, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has played an integral role in the success of this auction. Not only has this individual shared their remarkable works with us, but they've also played a pivotal part in today's record-breaking sales." Harold's heart began to race as the realization slowly dawned on him. The auctioneer turned to Elijah, who was seated near the front, a calm and steady presence among the flurry of excitement. "Mr. Mercer, it is my honor to announce that you are not just a featured artist tonight, but also one of the key buyers at this auction." Elijah Mercer represents a collective of investors who have been instrumental in acquiring many of the incredible pieces that have helped make this auction so successful. Harold's eyes widened in shock. Not only was Elijah the star artist of the evening, but he was also a major buyer. The very individual whose work had been commanding millions was now revealed to have a financial hand in the event's success. Elijah wasn't just an artist, he was a major force in the art world, holding immense power and influence. As the crowd applauded Elijah, Harold stood frozen, his mind scrambling to process the full magnitude of the situation. A humbling realization. The applause for Elijah was deafening, but Harold's thoughts were clouded. He felt a rush of embarrassment and guilt. This was the same man he had dismissed months ago, the artist he had ridiculed and dismissed as amateur. Now, not only had Elijah proven him wrong artistically, but he had become one of the most powerful figures in the art world. When the applause died down, the auctioneer nodded to Elijah, who stood to speak. "Thank you all for your incredible support tonight," Elijah said, his voice carrying over the room. "Art is more than just a commodity, it's a reflection of who we are. And it's my belief that art should represent everyone, not just the privileged few. I'm grateful to be part of this movement that's changing the art world for the better." The room erupted into applause again, and Harold felt a knot in his stomach. He had misjudged Elijah completely, and now the artist was not only reshaping the art world but also transforming it into something more inclusive, more accessible. Harold knew in that moment that his place in the art world was changing. He had not just been outbid or outshined by Elijah's work, he had been outpaced by a new vision, one that was faster, more inclusive, and driven by purpose. Elijah had broken through every barrier Harold had once believed to be immovable. Harold's reflection. As the evening came to a close, Harold watched as Elijah mingled with collectors and curators. The young artist had proven himself in ways that Harold could never have predicted, leaving him both in awe and in deep reflection. Harold had spent his career chasing exclusivity and prestige, but tonight, it was clear that the art world was shifting, and Elijah was leading the charge. For Harold, it was a humbling experience, a moment where he realized that the world of art had passed him by. Elijah Mercer wasn't just a brilliant artist, he was a game changer, and Harold was left to watch as the future unfolded before him. Weeks passed after the Art Horizon auction, and the art world buzzed with admiration for Elijah Mercer. His influence and success had set new standards, not only in the art market but also in the way artists were valued, respected, and supported. Harold Devereux, on the other hand, found himself in an increasingly precarious position. The gallery's financial troubles deepened, and the realization of how much the art world had passed him by weighed heavily on him. He had fought to preserve a way of doing business that had no place in the changing landscape of modern art. But then, something unexpected happened. Elijah, the artist he had once dismissed, made an offer to buy the gallery. The purchase. It was a quiet afternoon when Harold received the news. He had just returned from an exhausting meeting with his accountant, who had laid out the gallery's financial troubles in stark detail. The future seemed bleak, and Harold had already begun to make peace with the possibility of closing the doors of Devereux Gallery for good. The email from Elijah's lawyer was brief but clear: Elijah Mercer has made an offer to purchase Devereux Gallery. Harold's initial reaction was a mix of disbelief and resentment. The artist he had dismissed was now offering to buy the very space he had built his career in. But as the days passed, Harold began to consider the possibility. Elijah wasn't just a rising star anymore, he was a major player in the art world, and his influence was undeniable. If anyone could reshape the gallery, it would be Elijah. The deal was finalized quickly, and just like that, the Devereux Gallery became the Horizon Collective. The transformation begins. Elijah wasted no time in reimagining the space. Gone were the sterile white walls and pristine exhibits that had defined Devereux Gallery for years. In their place, vibrant colors and bold installations began to take form, reflecting the new mission of the Horizon Collective, to provide a platform for underrepresented, emerging, and diverse artists. Elijah envisioned a space where art wasn't just about exclusivity, it was about expression, storytelling, and accessibility. He wanted the Horizon Collective to be a place where artists from all walks of life could share their work without fear of being judged or rejected based on their background. The gallery would become a hub for creativity, a place where innovation could flourish without being constrained by outdated norms. Several key initiatives were introduced. The Rising Stars Residency, a program designed to give young, emerging artists from marginalized communities the opportunity to create and display their work in a professional setting. Community First Fridays, an event where the gallery opened its doors to the public once a month for free exhibitions, live art shows, and workshops aimed at engaging the local community. Global Voices Grant, a fund dedicated to helping underrepresented artists fund their projects, from exhibition fees to art supplies, ensuring that financial barriers would not prevent creativity from flourishing. The inaugural exhibition, Breaking Boundaries, showcased work from artists who had never been given the opportunity to exhibit in galleries of this caliber. The response was overwhelming. Visitors flooded into the gallery, captivated by the authenticity and raw emotion in each piece. Harold's redemption. Harold had not been expecting to be a part of the gallery's transformation. He had assumed his days as the gallery's owner were behind him. But Elijah, ever gracious, extended an offer to Harold. He could stay on as a mentor for the young artists in the residency program. At first, Harold hesitated. He had been humbled by the experience of watching Elijah's meteoric rise and by the glaring realization that he had been outpaced by someone he had once underestimated. He had spent his career promoting exclusivity and high-end art, never truly understanding the depth of the talent he had been ignoring. Now, he was being asked to help young artists, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to Elijah's. Would he be able to contribute anything of value? But Elijah, with his quiet confidence, reassured him. "You have knowledge that these artists need," he said. "Your experience is invaluable. Help them understand the business side of this world, the network they need to build. I can teach them how to create, but you can show them how to navigate the industry." Harold agreed, and he soon found himself working closely with the new residents, helping them refine their portfolios, guiding them through exhibition strategies, and introducing them to collectors who valued art for more than just its market price. Over time, Harold rediscovered the joy of mentoring, of seeing young artists bloom with the support they had never received before. A legacy of inclusivity. As the months passed, the Horizon Collective became a thriving space for artistic innovation. The exhibitions were diverse, bold, and unapologetically inclusive. The gallery became known not just for its record-breaking sales, but for its unwavering commitment to artists who had historically been shut out of the industry. Collectors, curators, and critics who had once been skeptical of Elijah's vision began to take notice. They saw the shift, the transformation that was happening not just in the art world but in the very foundation of how art was valued. Elijah's success proved that art didn't need to be exclusive to be valuable, it needed to be honest, raw, and open to all. The work of the artists at the Horizon Collective began to garner international attention. Many of them went on to have their own breakout moments in the art world, while others found success in unexpected places, some even moving into public art, transforming entire neighborhoods with their installations. Elijah had created a ripple effect, one that extended far beyond his own work. Elijah's legacy was no longer just about his art. It was about the art he had helped bring to life, the artists he had empowered, and the doors he had opened for those who had once been excluded. A full-circle moment. One evening, as the gallery prepared to close, Harold and Elijah stood together in the center of the main hall. The walls were adorned with new pieces from emerging artists, each work telling a unique story, a fresh perspective. The air in the gallery was thick with creativity, and the sounds of quiet conversation filled the space. "You've built something incredible here," Harold said, looking around with a sense of pride. "This isn't just a gallery. It's a movement." Elijah smiled, his eyes scanning the room. "It's not just me, Harold. It's everyone who's contributed, the artists, the mentors, the community. This space belongs to all of us." Harold nodded, understanding for the first time the true meaning of what Elijah had created. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be a part of it," he said. The two men stood together in silence for a moment, surrounded by the work of the next generation of artists, knowing that the Horizon Collective had become something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. It was a place of opportunity, of transformation, and of hope for anyone with a story to tell. For Elijah, this was the ultimate reward. It was proof that the barriers that once held him back had not only been broken but had been turned into stepping stones for others to follow. His journey had come full circle, and the legacy he had created would live on for generations.